is becoming increasingly important potentially, or something that could potentially be a tiebreaker. A couple of thoughts in terms of why you should consider branding or how a professional brand could be useful. First of all, I think it does help you stand out from the crowd. And as we know, it's a competitive research landscape right now when it comes to grant funding, and many other things related to our careers. And so by having a professional brand that helps you stand out, you have an opportunity to distinguish yourself from others. Another reason why you might consider having a professional brand is that it leads to opportunities. You have recognition, you have exposure, so this could lead to new job interviews or job opportunities. It could lead to speaking engagements. It could lead to networking opportunities, could lead to promotions or partnerships, or increased visibility for your work, which could result in more media exposure. Essentially, you're creating a memorable way to present your identity and the identity of your work in the public sphere. I also think there's a lot of things we can't control these days. What is said about us, or tons that we can't control right now as we live through this pandemic. But developing a professional brand is something that gives you some control and allows you to send a message about you as a person or you as a professional in terms of what you value, what your approach is, how you can inspire trust in other people. So I think there are lots of things here that relate to choices and control. The other reality is that someone is always going to be Googling about you or searching you up online. And so by getting ahead of it and having a professional brand that you are managing in some way, it allows you to make sure that they find the right messages about you when people go looking. A few things to think about as you consider developing a professional brand, and I'm sure many of you are at different points along this journey, so would really welcome your reactions. But some of the tools or points for consideration include, social media. What social media profiles will you use? How would you like to be present and engaging? Whether you have a website, and whether that website is for you, for your lab, for a particular project, whether you're leveraging your own institution's webpage, maybe via a subpage, or whether you're embarking out on having your own website. Whether you need a logo or a theme, and is this for yourself? Is it for particular projects? A lot of people approach this first by branding particular projects. Is it a brand for your lab, or is it a brand for a new organization? And Carrie has worked on branding for all of these with me over the years. And I think you need to have some clarity around what your goals are, why you're doing this, who your audience is. I would also say how important it is to work with a professional. So researchers tend to be do-it-yourself type people by necessity. We're used to having to do a lot of things ourselves. But I would say that this is a space that maybe if you have some special creative talents, or you have a friend or family member who has those types of talents, this could be a great place to leverage those. And there are certainly some cool tools that I've seen people use to develop logos for particular projects, in a more crowdsourcing type of way. But just to say that I have benefited immensely from working with Carrie over the years. And I've known Carrie since about 2012, 2013. Previous to that, I was creating my own posters and doing everything myself. And then I was on a panel and with my friend and colleague Marcia Campbell-Yo, who has been a part of CCHCSP. And she came in one day, I remember she came into my office with this incredible poster. And I'd never seen anything like it to advertise an event. And I was like, who did this for you? And she said, well, my neighbor, Carrie. And I said, introduce me. And since that time, Carrie and I have worked on many projects over the years. And I would say anything that you see that I'm doing or a part of, Carrie has had a hand in, and sometimes a big role. And it's been so fun working with her and co-creating things together. So I think just like you bring the right expertise onto your grant to cover off particular areas, you need to consider bringing the right expertise onto developing your branding. I would also, I think those are some of the thoughts that I wanted to convey. Again, I want to just mention the disclaimer again around this is not a substitute for doing good work and doing good quality science. But I invited Carrie and Katie here today just to share a little bit from their perspectives. Carrie as a creative professional and Katie as an early career scholar who's sort of navigating some of these territories for the first time. So Carrie and Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. And I'll just echo that one of the things we're going to talk about is that like discomfort with like being branded and the promotion piece and those kinds of things. So I'll just preempt that by saying I'm feeling that right now as we're about to talk. But as Carrie has told me, I know she's told Christine, and I'm sure will tell all of us kind of the importance of some of that kind of in this work too. So we just have a couple of slides we wanted to share, but really it'll be more of a conversation and want to give lots of time for discussion, as I'm sure many of you have lots of questions about this area, as I have had and continue to have as well. But maybe, Kira, I'll let you talk a little bit first about kind of who you are, how you got into this work, those kinds of things.
Okay, great. Great to meet everyone. I feel like my daughter is in university right now and she's doing Zoom University. And now I know how the teachers feel with all the sea of little squares and too many faces. Anyway, it's great to meet everybody. And thank you so much for having me. I first have my own disclaimer. I would like to acknowledge my existence in this amazing sort of field of research and science to Christine and to the amazing sort of experiences that I have learned through working with her and her projects and sort of the trajectory that she's been on. It's been really a good fortune to be able to do that. And I think, a lot of projects have branched off for me as a result of that in this realm, which I'm totally addicted to now and love the people and the work that's being done. So it's very rewarding. So thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done, Christine, to support me as well. And Marcia Campbell-Yo for which was a really cool project and probably my first project in research that has continued as well. And so it was really cool to be connected by these two women who are so amazing. So thank you so much for that. And this is just, Katie's got a slide up of my site, and to all the dog lovers who can feel the energy, which is a lot of what we're talking about now, is just finding what is it that is you and putting that out there in a professional and way that has personality and feels good to you. And that's very much where branding starts. And so I think what Katie and I wanted to do, because we haven't really done Christine and Katie and I haven't done this together before, so it's all a learning experience for us too, but we thought it would be cool to sort of walk through a real life situation of a branding project and sort of feel what that feels like. And I just wanted to also mention that branding can be very small and it can be very big in terms of scope of project. And so nothing is, too small to start with. I'll show a slide later. We did a research project poster, and it was just a one-pager that I did for someone. And we started off like that, and then it ended up being, something that we kind of built on, but it was a new way to kind of entice people to become involved in a research project. And so I'm learning too. And I love that. So I learn from you. And so it's not a one-way street. I'm not, in my work, I'm not sitting and going, okay, this is how we're going to brand and this is the process. I feel like it's very collaborative and very open and comfortable. And sometimes people don't know what they want to do, and sometimes they do. So that's where we usually start. Anyway, I'll throw it back to Katie, and maybe we can dive into some of your experience, Katie, if that's good.
Absolutely. So for me, this like deeper dive into branding really started when I was on postdoc at CCHCSP, and we got some funding to do a national patient engagement project where we were looking to co-build sustainable patient engagement for pediatric chronic pain research and practice. We did a priority setting process with people with lived experience, so youth, their family members, health professionals, and really non-researchers. So it was kind of this step where part of the research process was actually to reach members of the public. And of course, as Christine mentioned, I had the privilege of working and being mentored by her as a PhD student. And as many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with her It Doesn't Have to Work, It Doesn't Have to Hurt campaign, which Carrie was part of the branding. Christine was just starting that work as I was leaving her PhD lab and was on internship. So I'd watched kind of this amazing approach to it and knew with the spirit of this patient engagement project that we really needed to reach more people. So we reached out to like public relations to help us with our patient partners, our youth, our parents, to even just come up with a name for the project. Because I'd seen some of these for other James Lind Alliance approaches that were like top 10 for pain or top 10 for, name whatever disease as you're looking to identify the top 10 priorities in a given research area. And so we landed on this Partnering for Pain name for the project because it's a priority setting partnership, and we're doing it kind of in this space with pain. And that was a name that hadn't been used before. So we had this, we created a video, this little poster, this social media thing was done by like a research coordinator, right? Who had an interest in, imagery and other types of things like that. So she put this together, using open source kind of pieces. So, we did our project, we did all of this kind of with relatively little extra, focus on kind of branded, had some support to create a promotional video for the project and so on. But the real turning point actually was we had applied, the Ontario Spore Support Unit has a knowledge mobilization funding mechanism called the Empower Award. And so we knew we wanted, for this project to have impact, these top 10 priorities that were identified, we had to get it we had to spread it. We had to get it to funders. We had to get it to policymakers, we had to get it to researchers, we had to get it to clinicians. And this funding mechanism was specific to building knowledge mobilization. So what we did is we actually put in some funding in the grant budget to brand the project a little bit more so that it would have a better look, a better appeal as we went to try to make sure that the research we'd done would actually reach and impact the people that we wanted it to. And so we reached out to someone to help us do this, and this is what came back. And I don't know how you feel when you see these, but I felt very uninspired. They felt very dated to me. And even when I showed it to my mom, who's in her 70s, I just said nothing. I said, "What do you think?" She kind of paused, and she's not someone who's up on trends. She's an engineer, works in oil and gas, and then she's kind of sheepishly said to me, "They look like they're 15 years out of date." And I thought, God, if my mom says this, and this is what I'm also feeling, like this is not going to be good enough for me. Like some of these, I was like, what do they even mean? I Googled kids logos, and like a son and two kids showed up everywhere, even if it looked a little bit different. So I just was like, these are not, I don't think, going to work for our project. So lo and behold, when you've got someone kind of in your network like Christine, I reached back out to her and I said, "Help, like who's done all of your stuff? Do you have any recommendations?" And she said, "You need to talk to Carrie. Carrie's great. Let's reach out and talk to Carrie." So I did. So I reached out to Carrie through that connection, and we just had a conversation. And we knew what the spirit of the project was. We knew we loved the name. We knew all of that needed to be there. And I just talked, right? Like I just talked about kind of the values behind the project, the approach we were trying to take. And Carrie took it all. You sponged it all in. Yeah, exactly. You kind of took it all in. You probably asked me some questions. This is a few years ago now. And then went away. And I was like, gosh, fingers crossed, but it's got to be better than whatever I have going on here. It's definitely going to be better than it. And I don't know, Carrie, like what are your reactions when you see logos that feel like, because like branding, like logos even change over time, like stylistically and stuff. Like how do you kind of think about those kinds of things?
Well, I think also part of this story that you had, Katie, was that you had put a lot of information out there, the same idea of like, you talked quite a bit about what you were looking for. And I think the reason that you felt disappointed about those was that maybe you felt like what you were saying wasn't really heard in this particular case, because I think the child and the balloons and that was sort of imagery that you were trying to steer away from. And so I think it's a disconnect from the communication. And I sometimes think one of my most important jobs is to listen like really intently, but also almost like behind what you're saying. And then, you know, when you do those aptitude tests or personality tests and they ask you the same question like a million different ways and you can't even tell what's straight anymore. And then you know that you probably, like, even if you tried to manipulate it, they're gonna catch you in another spot saying it a different way. And so I feel like sometimes that's my approach a little bit. So someone talking and telling me all these things about what they do is so valuable, because I'm able to kind of do that sort of same circumvent around, you know, go around and find those answers that I want, and then try to embody it in what I bring back. And even if it's not the right thing, then the conversation should continue. And this kind of experience should actually help you, because you can say, which it did for us, is, well, what didn't you like about this? What was missing? What fell down for you? And you know, I think that's what I would say. And as far as, you know, logos being sort of dated or not dated, I think that you're always going to be in a situation where, you know, it's kind of like a car or anything else, you know, you try your best to keep something nice and, you know, modern in the moment or classic. And then there's going to be times where you're going to look at it and say, I just need to freshen it up again. And it might be that you've designed it properly, so you can just kind of just tweak the font even, and that's all it needs, or just change the lines a little bit or the color. And so you know, it's an ongoing thing. It's like having a house. You don't if you never do any renovations on it, when you go to sell it, you're like, why didn't I do something with it? So, you know, it's a little bit of a little bit of work along the way. But yeah, I would say that would be my impression of that.
Sounds good. And so this is what Carrie came back with. And after we met, I think she went away for a couple of weeks and came back and said, what do you think? I got inspired by this idea of some hands that are kind of in partnership together. And what I really appreciated, which really helped me feel like, oh, she got it, was Carrie had also included in this spec sheet some of the inspirations behind the graphic. So it's hands together, people are connected, there's an upward motion, it's collaboration, it's, you know, hands-on, many hands, and rationale behind the colors, like the yellow, it's positive, active, comforting, youthful, energetic. So it also just, and the reason behind the font that she selected. And so it just also, one, I really loved what we saw, but also I could see really the spirit behind how she'd been inspired by our conversation, and then very much felt connected to what she'd been able to put together. I don't know whether you want to say more there, Carrie.
I really like the colors.
And then we started to flesh it out, right? I mean, I think that's something, Carrie, that we talked about as things went on. So this really started for me around this project with some funding to build out kind of further knowledge mobilization. And then we were able to use this, you know, this logo, these colors, this script, like across all of the materials. And we'll talk. Sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I think you were at that point too, because you felt connected with it, then you were inspired by that. And so then you gave me a lot after that. Like, you were very involved in what we were working on then, because you saw the direction, like it gave us sort of a direction to work in. I think that was good too.
Yeah, but even beyond, I think the logo part, which we were initially talking about, Carrie, I think like one of the things you came back with as well was like a tagline for it. And I know like in some of Christine's work, right, like the it doesn't have to hurt kind of piece is really like, you know, that is a brand right now in and of its sense through many, many things and different streams. And, you know, so when I think about our work together too, you came up with this tagline that also really captured it and really emphasized with the design, like the together elements. Like I just felt like it was more than creating a logo is what I'm trying to kind of get across. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Okay.
And Christine did that "it doesn't have to hurt" tagline because she's brilliant.
Oh, there you go.
Just
I
wanted-
needed some extra help. And then Carrie, I've worked with Carrie to like build this out over a suite of things. And maybe Carrie, you can talk a little bit about like, how do you decide what these should look like, you know, as we build out beyond kind of a logo or a tagline to other types of like illustrated elements that people can use across things.
Yeah, you can see that illustration is very versatile, especially now where we're trying to communicate a lot of things sort of visually, and so I think Katie just kind of had really good ideas of what she wanted to represent visually. So we were able to say, she was like, okay, I want these like circle, I want a circle, and I want like, these people that are all connected to the patient. And so, you know, for instance, so that graphic on the right is sort of how I interpreted that, if that was for her website project. And then the other people, you're just not going to find, I think, you know, stock photography or stock imagery that, which, you know, Christine and I encountered that a lot too, with exactly what you want. And so being able to sort of control the elements within the illustration is really valuable. And of course, then you can also, like Christine was saying, you know, it's very competitive. There's a lot of noise. You're trying to find your voice and your look in there's a lot of stuff going on visual, you know, I forget the term anyway. So by illustrating something unique, then you can kind of connect everything that you do through that style. So now anything that Katie does, we can either adjust this a little bit or use this from, you know, the spirit of this in something else, but that there's always this sort of thread that runs through everything that she does. So when you see it on her website, everything looks together and related, and that will just continue along. And she's done this early on, so it's really easy now. As she adds more things, it all looks really good together. And I think that adds to the sort of professional look overall, and just like how you present yourself and how you present your work.
And this really expanded for me beyond the single project. So once I became a PI as an assistant professor now, a lot of people around me said, well, what are you going to call your lab? What are you going to do? And I said, well, actually, the work with Carrie around this particular project and the type of research approach that I had planned to take, which was very patient oriented with lots of stakeholder engagement, I felt like that was there. Like, and a lot of people said, well, obviously that's going to be the name kind of your lab, or that's how it's going to be. And so it really evolved from an initial project, but then now has become kind of the spirit of all the work. I think the other comment I just want to make, Carrie, through here too, and I know I've heard Christine talk about this in our work together with Skip, with you, when we work with patient partners, is just the representation in some of the images, and how engaging with patient partners or people with lived experience has been so valuable, not just in terms of race or age or gender, although certainly a portion of it, but even, you know, when we think about body size, right? Or how are we portraying images of disability in different things as well? And so I think it's been very helpful for me, you know, in learning more about this process, is engaging the stakeholders who I'm trying to share information to also get some of their input in sort of the design pieces and elements as well, which I know Christine has done a lot of.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of how, like, what graphical elements, what outputs are important. These are like infographics we've put together, and I was joking with Carrie. One of the things I've learned really well from Carrie is she always says to me, "Too many words, Katie, too many words. How can you say this with less?" And the one on the left-hand side was when we did together around the priority setting process. And then the one on the right-hand side is something a bit more recent. And it's tricky. This is a tricky balance I find with like science, right? Like some things need to be said a particular way, or, need to be comprehensive. And then other times we think that they do, but they don't really. So I don't know, Carrie, if you want to talk about like how you decide, or how you work with someone to decide, is an infographic the best thing to use? What should go on now? What should be highlighted within it? Like, how do you decide what your messages are?
Right. Yeah. And so yeah, I agree with you on the wording. And I think a lot of the work that I've been doing lately has been to take, massive amounts of information and data and results, and then try to figure out how to, like, I kind of imagine it. See, I'm visual, so I have to do everything with my hands, kind of like a filter, and then it comes out the other side, but it's a lot thinner and it's a lot more concise. And that's super important. But I think in the process of doing branding and figuring out what your main messages are, like you do everything in layers. So first it's like, what's your tagline? Say if you're doing something like Katie, got a logo, name, that's telling us something, tagline. And then you have like your very important sort of elevator pitch. You've heard that before in old branding conversations, maybe, which is like what you do or what your main message is. And then everything just kind of layers in underneath that. And so I'm always fighting like for the clarity and the concise qualities in that, in anything that you put in this design work. But it is challenging because there's so much stuff to put in, and it all is important, and it has to be worded a certain way. And then of course you finish it, and then it's like, let's do French. French is twice as long. So, yeah. So it's challenging, but you can see how the brand, even if you have a lot of stuff on a page, and of course we're looking at this smaller, if we were looking at it, in our hands, it doesn't feel so small. The brand is still through that. And if you became familiar with Katie's work, you would know that this was something from Katie's projects because of the branding. And I think, we just do stuff like anchor the bottom with something strong, or, like the graphic in the bottom right there that kind of invites you down the page. And we do lots of work trying to direct someone's eye and divide information. So it can be done. I mean, I did a project with Marcia, which was super, super detailed, and it took us a really long time, but it turned out to be really, really good because we all collaborated and we hacked words down and made everything fit. And it feels very gratifying when you are able to put everything into a page like that and get it done. So this is just an extension of your brand, but everything becomes easier. The more material you create in your brand, the easier things become. So you've almost like created like a toolbox of stuff that you can use. And once you've done a page, then oh, okay, well, I'm going to sort of follow this direction, and we're going to make something else that goes with that. So it does get easier once you've kind of tackled the main brand part of it.
I think one of the things that I found Carrie and I were talking about as we went to this, and I know you and Christine have had the privilege of doing this like in person, and Carrie, in terms of co-creating kind of new things, right? And really having that creative kind of synergy. And we've had to do some of that more virtually, but this is a patient journey map. So it came from an idea from a patient partner in a project who said, we should map out what this is like for a particular family. And so we invited one of the other families who was working on the project with us to see if they were willing to kind of help us, map out visually what their lived experience was dealing with pain from, early childhood to early adulthood. And so this was a real chance. And I think, Carrie, you hadn't done something quite like this before. And this was a huge, I found this really challenging, but it was an opportunity to get really creative together and bring in also a patient partner to help us kind of map this out and try to figure out what to highlight. What did we say? So maybe talk a little bit, Carrie, about like how you build some of this like creative process around new things.
Yeah, so I agree. This was very challenging and super interesting. And we leaned heavily on the patient partner to kind of guide us at the beginning of this, because it was all new territory to try to figure out how to do something like this. And I think if you're talking like just about this project, but more globally, I'm sure everybody can imagine some project that they have a vision for that you'd be like, how would you wouldn't think of putting it into an infographic. And yet it's super, it's very, sorry.
Oh, just gonna prompt people if you could mute yourselves. We're getting some background noise. Thanks.
Thank you. anyway, if you sort of think of it as a project that you might have, and you think, oh my God, I don't know how I would present this information. It's so fascinating and interesting to have some patient tell you all of this, and then how do we share that with someone else? And so Katie said we need to tackle this. So you can see we did some notes on the left there, and we sat together, all three of us, on Zoom and discussed and she talked the story through, and we pulled information out, and we couldn't, it was one of those projects that you have to collaborate on, and it was very, again, very rewarding to do it, and it's kind of created something new, which I think is neat. But so I guess I'm trying to say is the possibilities of translating your work and your research and the things that you think are this is so cool, I want to tell someone else about it. And you might think maybe someone's not even interested in hearing that aspect of it. And yet once you bring it to life with the input of other people, I think you can have something really interesting and successful and communicative.
This was a clear example for me of I would never tackle anything like this without someone with your expertise, in the sense that, where do you even start? How do you think about this information? And I liked your point, Carrie, that like sometimes as researchers or health professionals, we have an idea about something, but we don't have the skills to start to think about it in a visual way, right? Like what images would be good here? What is worthwhile highlighting? How do you use design elements to guide the viewer, like to a particular area, right? Or to highlight or pull out certain things. And this was a really, we've done I've learned so much from you, but, and mostly just how little an expert I am in this area and how much you need to work with someone else. But I think also, this was really interesting to highlight that. Okay, this was the part, Carrie, where you really wanted to talk about how you like putting people out there in terms of kind of using their photos, their own kind of personal brand. So I'm going to turn it to you, because I think Christine alluded to this. I've talked about it. I got this, I asked Carrie for some help putting together some recruitment posters for a study that we're just putting in research ethics for. And it came back with my picture on it. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so uncomfortable about this. But we've talked about it. So maybe you can share your thoughts. Like, why is that important? Like, why is that something we have to push ourselves out of our comfort zone to do?
Yeah. It's like it's a resounding shriek that you can hear it through the whole, I don't know. So I brought it up to Katie because I keep running into this repeatedly, is that, we're talking about brand, and we're talking about their work, and we're talking about their team. And a lot of people, want to keep their team close within the branding sort of circle. And so as soon as I suggest that, you are the brand, in the true sense of your work and of the lab, or whatever your scenario is, and people shriek back, they're just like, I'm not putting my picture on there, and I'm not comfortable, and I don't want to. And I think it's classic, and it has roots in some very deep reasoning, as to why people maybe don't want to put themselves at the front. And yet I think if you try, and this could be like a whole nother conversation that we could have, I think, about this, but I think what it creates, people want to see people, and the people that are behind good work. And like, I know with Christine, people are very like focused on something that has her picture in it, or that is visual like that, and allows you to connect with that person, because you feel connected with them when you see them. And so that's, I think, if anybody has gone on a website, and what's the first thing you do? You look at the website, and then maybe you say, like, our team, our people, you can't help but kind of migrate to the people that are behind all of these things. And that's true in lots of things in life. And so I think it inspires people, it creates trust and connection. You're inviting someone into to connect with you, with what you're doing, and it's appealing, and there's a lot of reasons. I'm losing all of my reasons in my head right now.
No, that's okay.
Talking, but I think it's also like, it's something to be proud of, your work, and it doesn't mean that you're putting yourself in front of everyone else that's working with you. And there's definitely ways brand yourself and your work and your team and the people around you, but it gives everybody more connection to see that and to see who's behind it. And I think it builds some trust too. Like to Christine's point, you know, when you talk about trust, it's like, it's not because branding isn't, like she said, replacing good work, but if you don't put your good work out there and you don't attach people who people trust to it or learn to trust, then it's just, you're just putting the work out there and it just doesn't seem like it has the depth.
It's helpful to hear. Yeah, no, it's helpful to hear you talk about it, because I think you're right. There's lots of reasons why people feel uncomfortable about it, whether it's gender, whether it's age, whether it's personality, whether it's living in an academic context. You know, there's lots of kind of factors that contribute to it. And it just reminds me, and one of the things Christine did before she even started getting into more of this like project branding pre-U was make sure all of her students had, all of her graduate students had professional headshots. And I think like that, as I've kind of moved towards like this more, it's been such a reminder to me that that's important, right? When you're putting, like, it's part of that kind of polished look as you put your things on that. So I've been grateful for that kind of support and direction along the way too, to say, this is also part of how you're presenting, right? Which speaks to then your work as well.
Yeah.
And Carrie, this is all just to say, Carrie's helped me kind of, I worked with another web design company, but Carrie helps me with how do I think about like, what are my main messages within my website? What am I trying to say about myself, about my team, about my work, about the scope of what I do, in addition to adding some great kind of graphical elements to make it look really good. But, you know, even more than that, you know, it's not just like the look, but I think you've really helped, certainly me, polish a lot of those other pieces, you know, that in terms of how my work or my lab or my program or my research comes across. Yeah, and Carrie, this was just the piece where when we were going through this in the website, part of the template had this cups of tea thing in terms of like what people were up to, and what we adjusted. And I said, we're got to change this. And you said to me, no, you don't. You have to keep that. So maybe you can talk, Carrie, about like personality, individualness, friendliness. Like, I think that's something that you had to kind of teach me too in it. And maybe Christine speaks to that.
Yeah, you bring your own personality into your work, and then if you feel connected to it too. So like the last slide, you had the mountains in the background because you said, I want to anchor my visuals in something that means something to me, because then you were totally into it. And that's why we kept the cup tea and we put the mountain on it. And you know, when you see that now, you love that. And I think the brand is for other people, but it's also for you yourself to feel like it feels good to have all your ducks in a row. It feels good to have, you know, a professional photo that you feel comfortable with. So when someone asks you for it, you just shoot it off to them in an email and you're done. And I think, you know, when you meet someone and you give them your card, or you give them, and they Google you and they look at your website, to Christine's point, it's like you feel good because you know when they go that they're going to see something that you're proud of. And you know, that's also going to inspire the team around you. Like putting together something like this gives your team something to rally for, and to be, you know, have purpose for all of the work that you're now pushing out there, and it looks good. And, you know, there's something to be said for that. I find sometimes like even the branding process is an awesome team building exercise when you get other people involved within your group. That's been really cool. And it doesn't have to be a whole website. It can be something small too. Like you can start small, and it's just a process that you build up as you can and as you wish. So
sounds good.
Yeah.
I know we have about 10 to 15 minutes left, and know people want to have conversation. You had a couple of other examples here, Carrie, not from our work together, but not sure if you want to add like a couple of other comments, and then maybe we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, you can just whip through those. I'll just, these were just some other examples if we wanted to talk about some, but this is Brianna Richardson, that one back there, but this was the original letter that we did to encourage people to become part of the research project. And that was a totally different way. And we got some really good feedback on, you know, people seeing that instead of just a letter. So you can, and we just worked on some branding there too, but I love this. I enjoy looking at this instead of a letter. And this was just talking about patient partner, like actually working with patient partners and research to kind of get their ideas too, kind of like Katie, like we did, and then to have something that is created and that comes out of that collaboration, which is also a different process. And these were just, these are just things you've probably seen on the internet, but it's probably more interesting to get some questions from you guys. And that's Marcia's project, Marcia Campbell. We're actually rebranding a little bit, I think, maybe, doing the polishing. So this was one of my very first projects. And Marcia's got her picture on there, which she just loves, just like all of you. But I think she looks fabulous. And now, she gets what I'm saying. And I think Christine does too.
Sounds good. Well, maybe I'll stop.
Perfect.
Thanks, Carrie. Maybe I'll stop us there. I can see some either comments or questions.
Perfect.
But yeah, maybe we can open it up.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks, Carrie. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. So I don't know, Linda, if we could welcome some hands up or some comments in the chat. Just noticing Brianna Richardson saying Carrie surprised her with a graphic of her dog and she loved it. Yeah, so Carrie has surprised me with a few fun illustrations over the years too. So Linda, questions?
Yeah, right on the same line with you, Christine. So everyone, please just text in your questions either through chat or put up your hand, and we'll call out on you.
Hi, this is Winona Campbell. Thank you so much for a brilliant presentation. It's just so helpful and interesting, and also just how talented Carrie you are, and what a great example of working with a team to capture their essence. The question I had was, I was intrigued by the material you had developed that was explaining the research study for families, which was done in a much more accessible way than most letters of information and consent forms. For the researchers, do you know if anybody had issues getting that through an ethics committee?
Brianna's probably, Brianna, I think you're on here still. Maybe
I can speak to that, and yeah, if Brianna wants to
oh
chime
yeah,
in.
right, Christine.
Put in the chat. So we have always included all of our recruitment materials and graphics in our research ethics packages. So everything has always been approved. So we've never had an issue, and and I think our REB really appreciate the much clearer communication. That said, it doesn't take the place of a consent form and sort of all the mandatory sort of requirements around a consent form, although I'd love to dismantle those and bring them back in a way that is, Carrie, if we had a Saturday together, we could probably reinvent the consent form in a way that actually provides informed consent. But Brianna, I don't know if you want to chime in. I'm assuming that you didn't have any difficulties with your approvals.
Yeah, hi. I was just going to say the same thing. So it was the graphic that Carrie designed for me, which was a bit of an infographic to walk families through what my study was about. It was really just kind of more for information, and it complemented the consent form. So it was nice because it was a much more engaging way to get families in the door, so to speak. And then they still had to go through that process with ethical consent and whatnot. But I think there was absolutely no comments from REB. I had to submit to 2 different institutions, and yeah, there wasn't any issue with that at all. So I think it's recognized as something that is more helpful because it's more user friendly, so to speak, to the participants or potential participants. So would definitely strongly encourage it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. It gave me lots of ideas for thinking about being more creative in the ethics materials I submit for recruitment. So, and really well done, Carrie, in terms of the creation of that.
Thank you.
So just wanted to quickly thank Michelle Herbert for asking Carrie's information, and both Christine and Carrie have put that in the chat box. So if any of you are interested in contacting Carrie about your branding for your research, her information is right there in the chat box. Wondering if there's any other questions. Just feel free to maybe unmute yourself or type in the chat box. And I can actually ask a question while we're waiting. I'm wondering, given that a lot of the people within CCHCSP and in the call are at different stages of their career, when do you think is a good time to start thinking about this kind of branding?
So I'll approach this from the supervisor perspective. I really promote this at every stage of a trainee project. So in my lab now, whenever we start a new project, the trainees develop, an identity for that project, for recruitment materials, depending on how big the scope of the project is. So Perry Tuttleman, who's done some work in the area of pain and cancer survivors, she received a reasonably large grant. And so she actually developed a bit of a logo. So yeah, Carrie, I think it's never too soon. And as Katie mentioned, I've always felt, that grad students should have a professional headshot so that when they win that award or they have an opportunity, they can send in a professional headshot. But Carrie, would you agree it's never too soon to be thinking about these elements?
Yeah, and I don't want people to think that you have to go crazy, and it to be very, I don't know, bigger than you want it to be or more expensive than you have. I think there's lots of ways to kind of start and then build, and there's lots of things you can kind of do yourself too, and in sort of preparing to be thinking about that, to be thinking about what are your messages, to be trying to be clear about how you say things when you're trying to kind of get your ducks in a row. And then when you sort of have more information, or if you can do it with somebody, then that's awesome too, because working through something together is very valuable, because I have a different perspective and I'm coming from a different side than someone on the inside. And I think that is good too. And I learn about what you're doing, and you learn about how I can help kind of reframe that a little bit.
So, and it looks like Catherine actually has an add-on to that, Catherine Walton. She's saying, as a postdoc without an independent research program, I'm wondering what steps can be taken to start this branding now, to start thinking through this to help with current studies and or job searching. What about funding for this at an early career stage?
So Katie and Carrie, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but just to say that, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to do this. I think Katie gave a great example of having, a limited budget and then being able to grow it. This is a legitimate professional expense on your grant. This is a knowledge translation cost. So if you're putting in for startup funding, consider putting in for funding that would cover this. This is an investment. It's like, the old version of getting your business card. I mean, it's an investment that you can grow. There are knowledge translation grants. So Katie gave a great example at OSSU in Nova Scotia. We used to have knowledge sharing support awards where in the early days when I didn't have a lot of money, Carrie remembers, I would get a $10,000 grant at a time and piece out different components of it. So yeah, I don't know, Katie, Carrie, your thoughts. I think it's money well spent. It's like setting up your lab.
Yeah, I mean, I think were able to get some funding as part of another project, right, that I put in. And I think, as Carrie knows, it's been haphazard. Like, it's been like, this is what I can afford, like, for this project, but already thinking from that conversation earlier on, would I have seen kind of like that this would become my brand, as part of my lab as a PI? Like, probably not, just because on postdoc I was like, I don't know what I'll be doing or where I'll be. But I think that vision of bigger, like, I think, Carrie, you've been really good to say to me along the way, like, you could do X or you could do Y, or down the road, it could look like it could build out this way, right? So you've provided me some of that, like, longer term path that then with every additional project, I've built in some funding, as Christine had said, and then built further out materials that help to flesh out kind of the whole brand, as opposed to everything all at once or just to a specific kind of project. So that's been really helpful for me. I mean, the other examples I would look to are, like, there's some really cool examples of people who've branded themselves, like, at that early career stage, just in terms of their presence on social media. Like, I think about, people who have done maybe perhaps non-traditional kind of careers, but like Science Sam or like other people like that, who've like built out, like you can have a brand presence by like what you put out in the world, I think, depending on where you are professionally in terms of other activities that you do, which is more than like a logo for a project, but it's like, what are you communicating out into the world in terms of the types of things that you're sharing about. So I think there's ways to do that even at like an early career stage without a lot of like, without necessarily some funding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and if you're going to if you're going to make the investment and do that, you want to make sure that what you actually put out isn't just, doesn't just look good, but that's actually conveying the right thing, that it's doing something for you, and that you're getting back the reaction that you're wanting to get back. And not to say that everything shouldn't, be polished in some way, but we can be very sort of strategic with the proper kind of branding and messaging and subtle little visual things. Like, they say so much, you can say so much with an image, and it's so true that you can do the same thing with creative. So people get a message without having to, you can kind of replace some of the words with your creative. And so then you can be more concise with the words that you do use. And I think that's really powerful too.
So it looks like we have 1 more minute to go, and I'm just wondering if we have maybe time for one more question. Anyone? Again, you can either unmute or text it in. Going once, going twice. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say thank you so much. This has been an unbelievable presentation, and we are so happy to have the 3 of you join us today. This session will be posted on the CCHCSP website, so please keep an eye out for it within the next few weeks. We'll definitely send out an email to the group and tweet it out and put it on our Facebook page. Quick reminder for our next sessions that will be coming up. The first one is Friday, March 12th on the quality in qualitative research. And the next one is going to be in Wednesday, March 31st with Excel tips and tricks. Thanks so much, everybody. You guys have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.